Chidinma's hands trembled as she stood outside Kang Ji-hoon's mansion at 2 in the morning, clutching a file folder against her chest like a shield. The most dangerous man in Seoul had just sent her a text that made her blood run cold. "Where's my file? I need it now." She was drunk, terrified, and about to make a decision that would change her life forever. But here's the thing about working for a man like Ji-hoon. You learn quickly that his needs come before your safety, your sleep, and definitely before your heart. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This is going to be an emotional roller coaster, so before we dive in, please hit that like button. It really helps us keep bringing you these stories. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because we absolutely love seeing how far these tales travel across the world. Chidinma Adebayo had been Ji-hoon's personal assistant for 3 years, and in that time, she learned to read him better than anyone else could. She knew when his silence meant anger and when it meant he was strategizing. She knew he took his coffee black with no sugar at precisely 7 in the morning, and she knew that beneath the tailored suits and cold stares lived a man who hadn't felt anything real in years. What she didn't know, what she refused to acknowledge even to herself, was that she'd fallen hopelessly in love with him. Seoul's skyline glittered behind Ji-hoon's penthouse windows that night as Chidinma rang the doorbell. Her head spun from the company celebration she'd left early, her stomach churned with nerves, and her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When Ji-hoon opened the door, he wasn't wearing his usual armor of expensive suits. Just simple black pants and white t-shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous, more real, more human. "You're drunk," he said, his voice flat. "I have your file," she replied, holding it out with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "The Busan contract. You said you needed it tonight." Ji-hoon took the folder but didn't step aside to let her leave. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her want to run. "Why did you really come here, Chidinma?" The question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Chidinma felt the alcohol loosening her tongue, felt 3 years of suppressed feelings rising in her throat like a scream. "Do you ever feel anything? Or are you just empty inside?" Something flickered across Ji-hoon's face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He stepped back, allowing her inside his sanctuary, the place where Seoul's underworld king removed his crown and faced his demons. "You want to know if I feel anything?" His laugh was bitter. "I haven't felt anything real in 5 years. Not since the accident that broke me in ways no one can see." Chidinma knew she should leave. She knew crossing this threshold would destroy the careful professional distance she'd maintained. But she dreamed of this moment too many times. Dreamed of seeing him vulnerable. Dreamed of being the one person who could reach past his walls. Maybe you're not as broken as you think. What happened next was inevitable and impossible all at once. Ji-hoon pulled her close, and for the first time since a rival gang's ambush had left him physically and emotionally scarred, he felt something. His doctors had told him the impotence was psychological, that his body had shut down after trauma, that he might never recover. But with Chidinma in his arms, whispering his name like a prayer, something inside him awakened. They stumbled toward his bedroom, shedding layers of pretense along with their clothes, and Chidinma gave him what she'd been saving without realizing it. Not just her body, but her heart, her hope, her foolish belief that love could heal anything. The morning after shattered every beautiful illusion the night had created. Chidinma woke to an empty bed and the sound of Ji-hoon's voice in the next room, cold and businesslike, already back behind his walls. She dressed quietly, her hands shaking for different reasons now, and slipped out of his penthouse before he could make her feel smaller than she already did. If you're watching this and thinking Chidinma should have seen this coming, drop a comment below. And if you're rooting for her to get her happy ending, please subscribe because trust me, this story is just getting started. 6 weeks passed in a blur of awkward office interactions and sleepless nights. Chidinma threw herself into work, pretending that nothing had changed, pretending she didn't feel Ji-hoon's eyes on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. But then came the nausea, the exhaustion that no amount of coffee could fix, and the growing certainty that her body was betraying her in the most terrifying way possible. The doctor's face was kind as she delivered news that made Chidinma's world tilt sideways. "Congratulations, Ms. Adebayo, you're pregnant with triplets." Triplets. 3 babies. Ji-hoon's babies. Chidinma sat in her car outside the clinic for an hour, hands pressed against her still flat stomach, trying to process the impossible. She had to tell him, despite everything, despite the morning after coldness and the wall that had gone back up between them, she had to tell him he was going to be a father 3 times over. She chose a Tuesday afternoon to break the news, rehearsing her words 100 times as she walked toward his office. But fate, cruel, twisted fate, had other plans. Through Ji-hoon's partially open door, she heard his voice, sharp and dismissive. "What about your assistant?" That was Kang Sung-ho, Ji-hoon's business rival turned reluctant partner. "She seems attached to you." Ji-hoon's response drove a knife straight through Chidinma's heart. "Chidinma? She's not my type. Whatever happened was meaningless. I'm ending the arrangement." Chidinma didn't wait to hear more. She turned and ran out of the building, the ultrasound pictures in her purse feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds. Ending the arrangement. The words echoed in her head as she drove home, packed a suitcase with shaking hands, and called her brother, Obi, in Lagos. "I'm coming home," she told him, her voice hollow. "Please don't ask questions, just send me money for a flight." Obi, bless him, heard the brokenness in her voice and asked nothing. Within hours, Chidinma had withdrawn her savings, booked a one-way ticket to Lagos, and written a resignation email that said nothing and everything. By the time Ji-hoon would read it the next morning, she'd be 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, flying away from the man she loved and toward an uncertain future. Lagos welcomed her with humid air and her mother's knowing eyes. Adane Adebayo took one look at her daughter's face and pulled her into an embrace that finally let Chidinma break down completely. "Moi, Mom, what happened?" her mother asked in Igbo, the language of comfort and home. Through tears, Chidinma told her everything. The night with Ji-hoon, his coldness, the pregnancy, his dismissive words. Adane listened without judgment, her hands stroking her daughter's hair the way she had when Chidinma was small. "Some men," she finally said, "don't know the value of what they have until it's gone. You focus on these babies. Let him figure out what he lost." The pregnancy was difficult. Carrying 3 babies strained Chidinma's body to its limits. There were days she couldn't get out of bed, days when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake running away. But her mother was there, and Obi visited every weekend, and slowly, painfully, Chidinma began to build a new life from the ashes of her broken dreams. The triplets arrived on a rainy Lagos morning, after 14 hours of labor that left Chidinma convinced she might die. But then the doctor placed 3 tiny bundles in her arms, 2 boys and a girl, and everything else faded away. She named them Amaka, Chidi, and Ngozi, giving them strong Igbo names that would connect them to her heritage, to the grandmother who'd saved her, to a home that had nothing to do with their father. Meanwhile, in Seoul, Ji-hoon was unraveling. Chidinma's resignation email had arrived without warning, without explanation, just a formal notice that she was leaving effective immediately. He tried calling, but her number was disconnected. He went to her apartment, but she had already moved out. It was as if she had never existed, as if the woman who had made him feel alive for one perfect night had been nothing but a dream. For the first month, Ji-hoon told himself he was angry. She had abandoned her post without proper notice, left him scrambling to find a replacement who could never quite anticipate his needs the way she had. But anger faded into confusion, and confusion twisted into something that felt uncomfortably like grief. He found himself looking for her in crowds, listening for her voice in his office, remembering the way she had looked at him that night like he was worth saving. His business partner, Sung-ho, noticed the change. "You're distracted," he said during a meeting 6 months after Chidinma disappeared. "My assistant left," he replied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The Nigerian woman, Chidinma?" Sung-ho's expression was unreadable. "I remember her. Very competent. Have you tried finding her?" The question planted a seed that grew into obsession. Ji-hoon hired private investigators, the best money could buy. They found nothing. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no trace of where Chidinma Adebayo had gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, taking with her the only real thing Ji-hun had felt in years. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe Ji-hun deserved to suffer after being so cold to her. Drop a comment if you agree or disagree, because I really want to know what you all think about his character. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do. We post stories like this every week, and your support means everything to us. 3 years crawled by like decades. In Lagos, Chidinma built a life around her children. She worked as a translator, her fluency in Korean, English, and Igbo making her valuable to companies doing business across continents. The money was never quite enough, but her mother helped, and Obi sent what he could, and somehow they made it work. The triplets grew into beautiful, chaotic 3-year-olds who filled the house with laughter and questions, and love so fierce, it sometimes made Chidinma's chest ache. Amaka had Ji-hoon's serious eyes and strategic mind, already arranging her toys in careful patterns. Chidi was pure joy, bouncing off walls and making everyone around him smile. And Ngozi, the baby by 3 minutes, was quiet and observant, watching everything with an intensity that reminded Chidinma painfully of their father. The children asked about him sometimes. "Where's our daddy?" Amaka would ask, her small face serious. "Fooding at school says everyone has a daddy." Chidinma had prepared for this question, had rehearsed her answer 100 times. "Your daddy lives far away," she would say, which was true. "He doesn't know about you," which was also true. But Mama loves you enough for 2 parents, which was the truest thing she'd ever said. In Seoul, Ji-hoon's investigators finally caught a break, a travel record, 3 years old, showing Chidinma Adebayo had flown to Lagos, Nigeria. The trail was cold, but it was something, and Ji-hoon clung to it like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He'd spent 3 years wondering what had driven her away so suddenly. 3 years analyzing every interaction they'd had, trying to understand what he'd done wrong. The memory of that phone conversation with Sung-ho kept surfacing, the one where he'd said something about ending an arrangement. But he'd been talking about their business deal with the Busan contractors, nothing to do with Chidinma. Had she overheard? Had she misunderstood? The possibility haunted him. The idea that he'd lost her over words taken out of context, over silence when he should have spoken. Ji-hoon booked a flight to Lagos without telling anyone. He had no plan beyond finding her, no speech prepared, no strategy beyond the desperate need to see her face again and beg her to explain why she'd left. His investigators had narrowed down her location to a neighborhood in mainland Lagos, had even found records of a child registered under her name at a local clinic. The detail barely registered. Ji-hoon was focused entirely on Chidinma, on making her understand that her absence had nearly destroyed him. The Lagos that greeted Ji-hoon was nothing like Seoul's sleek efficiency. The city was loud, vibrant, chaotic in ways that would have normally made him uncomfortable, but he barely noticed. Too focused on the address his investigator had provided. Too consumed by the possibility that he might finally get answers. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Ji-hoon never made it to Chidinma's house because that same morning, little Ngozi woke up with a fever that wouldn't break. Chidinma, terrified by her daughter's burning skin and labored breathing, bundled all 3 children into a taxi and rushed to the nearest hospital. The hospital's corridor was crowded and noisy, full of worried parents and crying children. Chidinma held Ngozi against her chest while Amaka and Chidi clutched Kurt, frightened by the unfamiliar environment. She turned a corner toward the emergency room, and time stopped. Ji-hoon stood 20 feet away, looking lost and out of place in his expensive suit, and their eyes met across the chaos. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his gaze dropped to the 3 children pressed against her, and Chidinma watched his face cycle through shock, confusion, and dawning realization. "Stay away from us." The words came out stronger than she felt, protective instinct overriding 3 years of longing. But Ji-hoon was already moving toward them, his eyes locked on the children's faces, like a man seeing a miracle. "Are they—" His voice cracked. "Are they mine?" Chidinma felt Amaka and Chidi press closer to her legs, felt Ngozi's fevered weight in her arms. "Does it matter?" Her voice shook with anger and fear and a terrible, traitorous hope. "You made it clear I meant nothing to you." I need you all to pause and imagine being in Chidinma's position right now, seeing the man who broke your heart face to face with the children he doesn't know exist. What would you do? Seriously, comment below because I'm dying to know. And if this story is getting to you the way it's getting to me, smash that like button and subscribe for more emotional roller coasters. A nurse approached, concerned by the confrontation. Ma'am, your daughter needs to see the doctor. The words broke the spell. Chidinma pushed past Jihoon, holding her children close as she followed the nurse into an examination room. But Jihoon didn't leave. He stood in the corridor like a statue, his mind racing through calculations and realizations. 3 children. 3 years since Chidinma had disappeared. The timing was impossible to deny. An hour later, when the doctor assured Chidinma that Ngozi's fever was just a virus and would pass with medication, she emerged to find Jihoon still waiting. He'd found chairs for them in a quiet corner, away from the crowd, and the look on his face was so raw, it made her chest hurt. Please, he said simply. Talk to me. Chidinma settled the children with coloring books the hospital provided, then sat as far from Jihoon as the small space allowed. What do you want me to say? That I heard you tell Sungho I wasn't your type? That whatever we had was meaningless? That you were ending things? Jihoon's face went pale. You heard that conversation? Chidinma's hands clenched into fists. I came to your office that day to tell you something important, but I heard enough to know you didn't want to hear it. Chidinma, no! Jihoon leaned forward urgently. That conversation, I was talking about ending a business arrangement with Sungho, a contract dispute about the Busan deal. It had nothing to do with you. The words hummed between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Chidinma felt her carefully constructed anger crack, revealing the hurt underneath. Then why were you so cold the morning after? Jihoon's composure finally shattered. Because I was terrified. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. For 5 years, I felt nothing. Nothing. Doctor said it was psychological, that the trauma from the ambush had broken something in me. But that night with you, I felt everything, and it scared me more than any gun pointed at my head. Mama, Amaka's small voice interrupted them. Who's this man? Both adults turned to find 3 pairs of curious eyes watching them. Jihoon stared at the children, his children, really seeing them for the first time. Amaka with his serious expression, Chidi with Chidinma's bright smile, and Ngozi, the baby by 3 minutes, still flushed with fever, but alert and watching everything. Are you our daddy? Amaka asked with the blunt honesty only children possess. You look like the man in my picture. Chidinma had kept one photo hidden in her jewelry box, never knowing her observant daughter had found it. Jihoon looked at her with such hope and heartbreak that she had to look away. Yes, Jihoon said softly, kneeling to be at the children's eye level. I'm your daddy, and I'm sorry I wasn't there. What followed was messy and complicated and painfully honest. They found a private corner of the hospital cafeteria where Chidinma finally told Jihoon everything. The pregnancy, her fear after overhearing his conversation, her decision to flee rather than burden him with children he didn't want. Jihoon listened without interrupting, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. I searched for you, he said when she finished. For 3 years, I've been trying to find you. I hired every investigator in Seoul. I thought you left because I'd somehow hurt you, and I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. You didn't know I was pregnant, Chidinma said, the realization settling over her like a blanket. And I didn't know that conversation wasn't about me. We both made assumptions. Terrible assumptions. Jihoon watched the children playing at a nearby table, supervised by a kind nurse who had taken pity on them. I missed 3 years of their lives. I missed everything. The doctor who had treated Ngozi approached their table, chart in hand. Mrs. Adebayo, I wanted to discuss your daughter's blood work. We found... He paused, noticing Jihoon's medical bracelet. Are you related to these children, sir? Jihoon's recent healthcare was minor, but worrying enough that he wore the bracelet still. I'm their father. The doctor's expression shifted. That's fortunate. We've been trying to build a donor registry for children with rare blood types. If you're AB negative, like your daughter, you might be a match for future needs. The words were clinical, routine, but they hit both adults like a revelation. Fate had brought them to the same place at the same time for a reason. 3 years of separation, of pain and misunderstanding, and they'd ended up in a hospital corridor in Lagos with their sick daughter between them. If you're still with me, I just want to say thank you. This story is long, I know, but I promise we're getting to the good part. If you're emotionally invested like I am, please consider sharing this video with someone who loves a good redemption arc. And don't forget to subscribe. We're building a community here, and I'd love for you to be part of it. The conversation that followed stretched into evening. Chidinma's mother arrived to take the children home, eyeing Ji-hoon with the same protective skepticism she'd shown every man who had ever looked at her daughter. "Muamma, are you sure?" she asked in Igbo. "No," Chidinma replied honestly, "but I need to hear him out." Once the children were gone, the conversation became more raw. Ji-hoon told her about the years after she left, about how his business had suffered, about how he'd realized too late that she'd been the only real thing in his carefully controlled life. Chidinma told him about the pregnancy, about giving birth alone except for her mother, about the night she'd cried herself to sleep missing him, even though she was angry. "I don't expect forgiveness," Ji-hoon said as the hospital began to quiet around them. "I don't expect anything, but please let me know them. Let me be their father, even if I can never be anything to you again." Chidinma studied his face, seeing past the cold mask to the man beneath. "Words are easy, Ji-hoon. You were good at words when you needed something from me at work. But these are my children, our children. If you want to be their father, you'll have to prove it." "Tell me how," he said simply. "Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it." What followed was a tentative arrangement that felt both natural and terrifying. Ji-hoon stayed in Lagos for 2 weeks, visiting the children every day at Chidinma's mother's house. They learned their routines, their favorite foods, the games they liked to play. Amaka warmed to him quickly, fascinated by his stories about Seoul. Chidi made him laugh, something Chidinma hadn't seen him do in years, and Gozi, once she recovered from her fever, claimed his lap as her favorite spot. Watching him with their children did something to Chidinma's carefully guarded heart. She saw the man she'd fallen for 3 years ago, the one who'd been hidden beneath layers of trauma and fear. She saw him learn to braid Ngozi's hair from YouTube videos, saw him research Nigerian history so he could answer Amaka's endless questions, saw him run around the compound with Chidi until they both collapsed laughing. But she also saw the shadows that still haunted him, the moments when he pulled back as if afraid of getting too close. One evening, after the children were asleep, Chidinma confronted him on her mother's small porch. "You're still scared," she said. "I can see it." Ji-hoon didn't deny it. "I spent 5 years feeling nothing. Then one night with you, I felt everything. And the next day, you were gone. Part of me is terrified that if I let myself feel this again, let myself love you and them, it'll be taken away." "Life doesn't come with guarantees," Chidinma said softly. "You can choose safety and numbness, or you can choose to feel everything, the good and the bad, but you can't have both." The conversation shifted something between them. Ji-hoon began to let his walls down, bit by bit. He told her about the ambush that nearly killed him, about the months of physical therapy, about the psychological scars that had manifested as impotence. He told her things he'd never told anyone, trusting her with his brokenness because she'd already seen him at his worst and hadn't run. Chidinma, in turn, told him about the loneliness of pregnancy, about the fear of raising 3 children alone, about the nights she'd wondered if she'd made a mistake leaving Seoul. They circled each other like wounded animals, afraid to trust, but unable to stay away. When Ji-hoon's 2 weeks ended, he had to return to Seoul for business he couldn't postpone. The goodbye was harder than either expected. The children clung to him, making him promise to call every day. Chidinma watched from the doorway, her heart in her throat. "I'll come back," Ji-hoon said, speaking to all of them but looking at her. "Every 2 weeks, I'll be here, until you trust me enough to consider something more permanent." The next 6 months unfolded in a pattern of visits and video calls. Ji-hoon kept his promise, flying to Lagos every 2 weeks without fail. He brought gifts, too many at first, until Shidinma told him to stop trying to buy their affection. He learned Igbo phrases from Adane, who slowly warmed to him. He established a trust fund for the children's education, but did it quietly, without fanfare. More importantly, he showed up. When Chidi broke his arm falling off a climbing frame, Jihoon was on the next flight to Lagos. When Amako won a school award, he was in the audience cheering her on. When Gozi had nightmares, he learned to comfort her over video calls until she fell back asleep. He became a constant, reliable presence in their lives, proving through actions what words could never convey. And slowly, carefully, Shidinma felt her walls crumbling. She noticed small things, the way Jihoon looked at her when she thought she wasn't watching, the gentle touches that lingered a moment too long, the vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about his life and soul without them. She caught herself thinking about him between visits, caught herself missing him, caught herself falling in love with him all over again. We're in the home stretch now, and I promise this is worth sticking around for. If you've made it this far, you're the real MVP. Show some love by hitting that like button. It takes 2 seconds but means the world to us. And comment telling me if you think Shidinma should give Jihoon another chance. The turning point came on a humid Lagos evening, 6 months into their tentative reconciliation. Jihoon was visiting for his regular 2 weeks, and Shidinma's mother had taken the children to visit a cousin, giving the adults rare time alone. They sat on the small porch, drinking palm wine and watching the neighborhood wind down for the night. "I want you to come to Seoul," Jihoon said suddenly. "You and the children. Not to visit, to stay." Shidinma's heart stuttered. "Shidinma, let me finish." He turned to face her fully. "I know I have no right to ask. I know I destroyed your trust and wasted 3 years we could have had together, but I'm asking anyway. Come to Seoul. Let me give you and the children the life you deserve. Let me prove every day that I've changed, that I can be the man you need me to be." "And what would I be?" Shidinma asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your assistant again? Your secret?" "My wife." The words hung in the humid air between them. "If you'll have me. I know it's too soon. I know you need more time, but I need you to know my intentions. This isn't about the children. I mean, it is, but it's also about you. It's always been about you, Chidinma. I was just too scared and broken to see it 3 years ago." Before Shidinma could respond, a smell of smoke cut through the evening air. They both stood, looking toward the house, where wisps of gray were curling from under the front door. Electrical fire, Shidinma thought with crystal clarity. The wiring in these old houses was always faulty. "The children's room!" she gasped, already running. The children weren't home, but she moved on instinct, forgetting in her panic that they were safe with her mother. Jihoon grabbed her. "Shidinma, stop! The children are with your mother, remember? We need to get out and call for help." But Shidinma had already realized her mistake about the children and shifted focus. "My mother's documents, the children's birth certificates, our passports, everything is in there." She pulled free and ran inside, Jihoon cursing and following. The smoke was thicker inside, burning their lungs. Shidinma made it to her mother's room, where the important documents were kept, Jihoon right behind her. They grabbed what they could, but the fire had spread faster than either anticipated. Part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking their exit through the front of the house. "The back window," Jihoon said, pulling Shidinma toward it. He smashed the glass with a chair and helped her through first, then followed, both of them tumbling into the backyard as neighbors gathered and someone called the fire brigade. They sat on the ground, covered in soot and ash, watching flames consume the small house that had been Shidinma's sanctuary for 3 years. Jihoon pulled her against his chest, his heart pounding against her back, and Shidinma finally let herself cry, for the home they'd lost, for the years they'd wasted, for the fear that had just gripped her, thinking the children might have been inside. "You could have died," Shidinma said, turning in his arms. "You ran into a burning house for papers." "I ran in because you did," Jihoon corrected, "and I do it again. For you, for them, I'd do anything. That's what I've been trying to show you these past 6 months. There is nothing I wouldn't do for this family." Shidinma looked at him. really looked at him, and saw the truth written in every line of his soot-streaked face. "I love you," she said, the words simple and certain. "I never stopped. Even when I hated you, even when I was terrified and pregnant and alone, I loved you." Ji-hoon's response was a kiss that tasted like smoke and tears and promise. "I love you too. All four of you. Come to Seoul. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." The fire brigade arrived, along with Ji-dinma's mother and the children, who were thankfully too young to fully understand the danger. The house was a total loss, but everyone was safe, and somehow that was all that mattered. They relocated temporarily to a hotel while insurance was sorted, and Ji-dinma finally gave Ji-hoon her answer. "Yes," she said, "to Seoul, to marriage, to all of it. But on one condition. We do this as equals. Not your assistant, not someone who owes you anything. Equal partners." "Equal partners," Ji-hoon agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The following week, as they prepared to relocate to Seoul, a package arrived at their hotel. Ji-dinma opened it to find photographs. Dozens of them, spanning the past 3 years. Her and the children in Lagos, Ji-hoon in Seoul, recent photos of all of them together. Someone had been watching, documenting their lives. The note inside made her blood run cold. "He took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from him. S.H." Ji-hoon's face went pale as he recognized the handwriting. Sung-ho, the business rival he'd outmaneuvered years ago, the man who'd been on that phone call the day Ji-dinma overheard and fled. Apparently, Sung-ho had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Ji-dinma looked at the photos spread across the hotel bed, then at Ji-hoon, then at their children playing in the next room, oblivious to any danger. "What do we do?" Ji-hoon gathered the photos with shaking hands, his jaw set with the same determination she'd seen him use in business. "We go to Seoul as planned, but we go together and we stay alert. Sung-ho wants to destroy me, but he won't touch my family. I won't let him." As they began making calls to increase security, Ji-dinma felt a chill run down her spine. They'd finally found their way back to each other, finally built something real and lasting. But their story, it seemed, was far from over. So there you have it, everyone. Ji-dinma and Ji-hoon found their way back to each other, but a new threat looms on the horizon. Will Sung-ho make good on his threat? Will their newfound family survive whatever comes next? You'll have to wait for part 2 to find out. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. We'll be posting the continuation soon. And please take just 2 seconds to like this video and leave a comment telling me what you think is going to happen. Do you think Sung-ho is working alone? What would you do in their situation? I love reading your theories. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that fall apart before they can be put back together stronger than ever. Thanks for watching!